So last week when I read out the story treatment, I believe I read out the part that referred to a Lukasa. That the farewell hall with its columns and walls studded with these things is in fact a Lukasa. So what is a Lukasa? I learned about a Lukasa from Lynn Kelly, who has written a number of quite fascinating books. And the memory code is the one that I cited in this. But she also has another. So the memory code is a book that explores ancient and indigenous ways that people have been remembering things. And a Lukasa is an indigenous way that a particular group of people in Africa have been remembering things. So it is a handheld device. And if you get her book, The Memory Code, or also another book called Memory Craft, where she talks a little bit more about it and how she has created one for herself. And it's quite astonishing what she did. But it's handheld. It's like the size of a phone. And it's got beads and shells and maybe some scratchings on the surface. It's like a piece of wood that's got these things adhered to it. And if you know anything about a memory palace is a place where you can focus your own personal memory and put yourself in a location. So it's very easy for any of us right now to kind of imagine that we are in our kitchens, even though we're not there, right? And we could imagine something happening in our kitchens that we want to remember in the future. And that activity of placing something that helps you remember, and there's a lot that you can get into there. It's generally you create a story or act something out, you make it really vivid. You stick that in a place. Well, what the Lukasa does is it shrinks those places down to little bitty beads and shells. And so you interacting with a Lukasa, you're touching the beads, you're touching the shells, and that activity, you can still imagine in a minute scale, gigantic things happening where that bead is, that's just at the upper left-hand corner, right? So it's a handheld memory device, and African people who were trained to use it, basically they're trained on remember a bunch of stuff. Now use this Lukasa to help you, and they remember encyclopedic amounts of stuff. And Lynn Kelly talks about having a very poor memory her whole life. And she learned about this and she's like, this is not going to work, but I'll try it. And she took a hunk of wood and she had some old jewelry and she tore it apart and she just like glued it on there. And she ended up, to her own astonishment, able to remember 420 different species of birds in Australia through holding that thing in her hand.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And so that's what a Lukasa is. So where did I put it? I didn't put it into Roanoke because I came at it, it's coming to life as an expression through Roanoke, but for me, it's something else. So I put it in a general section that I needed to create for this purpose, because I went looking in my index, and all of the things that I have in my index and in my Zettelkasten that pertain to memory were a little too specialized in a different direction. So for example, I have a section that talks about how I might integrate my work on memory with the Zettelkasten. Close, but that's not, and even though this is Zettelkast, right? It's close, but that's not really, it didn't want to live there. It wanted to kind of, it wanted to be with a little more general information. So I created a card, it's a category card, 2,500 memory arts. And I wrote on the category card, Ars Memorativa, strategies and techniques developed to enhance and optimize natural human capability to store and retrieve information to and from memory. And so 2500 is the category, and Lukasa is the first kid in there. And so it's 2500.1.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, thank you.
Mine is probably the shortest one. So let me do that and move on out of the way for the longer, more in-depth presentations. Okay, so I'm started my Zettelkastens over again as a minimalist, and I also decided that I would take. I keep borrowing these pages from other places, but I think they're working. So I'm borrowing a thought process from Victoria, I think, and I have a number that's set up for this adventure. Period. Okay, it is the Roanoke category. It's by itself. It's by itself, sitting there and with this first card and ready to grow. That's what I decided I would do. Okay, see how short that was? Yeah. Okay.
Clearly, Deb and I have that spooky attraction thing going on, because mine, I did give mine a Roanoke number, which is 1180. And then slash and the date 2024-10-21, which is the date I made the card. So that makes sense to me because it's indexed first under Roanoke, then under Lukasa, then under memory, under Julianne, and under Zettelkast. So those are all the places that I would think to go if I were trying to find this. So that's what I did, is 1180 is my Roanoke section. And so this just became installed right there in that section. And then I even have my first Roanoke card is Julianne's treatment of it. So that's always my placeholder in my box, because then I know all of it is right there. That's what I did.
So the folded paper goes into your box as well.
Absolutely. If it's something that I want to have the whole thing, especially if it's just one page, maybe two, but usually just a one page of something, it just gets folded into quarters and numbered just like a card, and it gets stuck in Wilma.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
I did start with, of course, the card from Julianne. And I actually already had a memory section in my Zettelkasten. So I had to take a look at my index card and entries, and based off of what she used for her tagline, I basically just copied her card exactly, so that it would go into my Zettelkasten the same way she has it in hers. But in the process of looking through that section and the index, I found a quote from Francis Yates' The Art of Memory, which was my foundational book that I started with to get a background in memory systems in order to learn more, to start off my research on Raymond Lull. So in a later chapter, once you get into the Renaissance, there is a guy called Robert Flood who made a memory, not just a memory palace, but a memory theater. And it was not an imaginary theater. It was a real physical little miniature theater that he built that you could go sit in. And the idea was you could sit in this theater and learn all of the different things that were possible to learn in the Renaissance. So the quote from that book was about this. It said, "It is because Flood's man as microcosm potentially contains the world that he can reflect it within. Flood's occult art of memory is an attempt to reproduce or recreate the macrocosm-microcosm relationship by establishing or composing or making conscious in the memory of the microcosm the world which he contains, which is the image of the macrocosm, which is the image of God. So, the concept of microcosm and macrocosm, it was very a common image then of, the world and specifically humans are the image of God and contain everything of God in miniature. So if we can understand ourselves, then we can understand God, was the idea. And so I had written this down because it was a good encapsulation of what Lull, Bruno, and Flood were all trying to accomplish with their various different systems. And a very interesting thing about that theater is that you might think that all of the attention would be focused on the stage, because that's usually how it works in a theater. But actually, in this memory theater, the user would sit where the stage is and would look out towards the audience, and the layers of seats going up, as they were in a theater usually are. That's where all of the different memory images were stored. So I thought that this just fit in perfectly with the idea of the Lukasa for the farewell hall, because basically that's what they're trying to do in this farewell hall, is to have this image, this information encoded in to transmit to a later generation. And I don't think I brought it up with me, but I did write another card. This one is just in my general Zettelkasten, but I did write a card talking about how it would fit into the story. And then I was kind of wondering, well, how am I going to number this one? Like, I didn't want to put it into just the general because it was part of the story. So I haven't done it yet, but yes, I will be making a Roanoke section to put stuff specifically for the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, before I could place it into my system, I had to shrink it down, which is what made it a little hard to share with you over the video, because this whole card became my input. So when I'm using my 4-step process for creating a main card that's going to go into my system, I had to use this whole thing as what came from the author, in this case, Julienne. So then my reaction to it was, well, will all the knowledge of the separated be thus encoded? And I think we're coming to the conclusion that yes, it will be. And so my tagline was, a Lukasa facilitates, a Lukasa facilitates recall of unfathomable amounts of info. So as an addition to recall, I added memory, and in addition to unfathomable, I added huge, because I would be more likely to have memory in huge and not be likely to remember unfathomable, even though that was what was in my heart. So I included it. So then, as to where this is going to go, I don't really have a memory section in Zeek, although I've got one coming up in my new upcoming minimalist is going to have a section on memory. But this guy's getting filed now, and I don't change numbers, so I guess I'll have to link to it later. So I had to find something in my big Zettelkasten that it goes with. And this is the card that I came up with. And this has to do with the only thing I had on memory in my systems to date was a quote from Sertolanges, who says that was quoting Montaigne, who calls notes paper memory. And so, okay, so I've got a memory system right now, it's notes, because again, like Kelly, like Lynn Kelly, I don't have a very good internal memory at all. I've ordered her book, Memory Craft, and so maybe I'll learn some of the techniques, but this is all I had on memory to go on. So even though it's a tenuous link, it is a link. And in my belief, a tenuous link is better than launching a whole new category. And I said, but the only useful if, but notes are only useful if accessible and preferably speedily. So this is my reaction to this card, which is quite an old one in my system. And so since this is the card number on the card it went with, this one was the next one in series. But well, it turns out that notes are paper memory is a pretty busy section in my Zettelkasten, and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H were already taken. So yes, this new piece of information went in section I.
Is that the first time that memory was what called it in there, as opposed to notes?
Yes. And so this also is the only thing that will link externally once I get link in with my new system that I'm teaching the people who are going through the minimalist program with me. I'll have a memory section in that area, and I'm going to have to figure out, well, how am I going to integrate these two systems? It was going to be rather interesting, I think. And there will clearly be this card will be a link, because these are all about notes. And in fact, observation notes, reformulation notes, main notes, bib cards, bib notes, excerpt notes, night notes, and morning notes, with night notes and morning notes being from Sertolanges. So yes, this is all on notes, and this is the first one that pulls in memory.